If you're listening to this, you may drift off before the end. So before you do, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Before we start, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Now, close your eyes. Just relax, take a deep breath and let everything go. Good night. Now we can begin. The road stretched out endlessly ahead, a ribbon of cracked asphalt swallowed by the dusk. The sun had long since slipped beneath the horizon, leaving behind only a faint glow that stained the sky a deep, sorrowful purple. The hum of the engine filled the cabin, steady and low, a companion to the silence that pressed in from all sides. The driver, alone, or so they thought, kept their eyes fixed on the road, fingers loose on the wheel, as the trees on either side blurred into shadowed walls. It was the kind of night that felt hollow, where the world beyond the headlights seemed to fall away into nothingness. Every few miles, a road sign would appear out of the gloom, worn and unreadable, as if warning of destinations that no longer existed. The air inside the car grew stale, heavy with the scent of old upholstery and the faint trace of rain that had fallen earlier in the evening. There was a strange comfort in the isolation of the drive. The driver had no particular destination, just the need to keep moving, to stay ahead of the memories that threatened to catch up if they stopped for too long. Outside, the night deepened, swallowing the last hints of twilight. The radio, long silent, crackled faintly now and then, as if catching a voice too distant to make out. A curve in the road revealed a stretch of fog that clung to the ground like a ghostly tide, seeping across the asphalt and softening the edges of the world. The driver slowed, instinctively cautious, and watched as the beams of the headlights cut through the mist, casting strange, shifting shapes that dissolved before they could be understood. It was then that the feeling began, subtle at first, no more than a prickle at the back of the neck, a faint sense of being observed. The driver glanced at the rearview mirror, expecting nothing but the empty back seat, but the shadows seemed deeper there, as if something unseen was seated in silence, watching. A chill crept along the driver's spine, a coldness that had nothing to do with the temperature. They told themselves it was only the night playing tricks, the fatigue of the long drive weaving illusions from the edges of the dark. Yet, as the miles slipped past, the feeling grew stronger, heavier, like a weight pressing down upon the car, upon the driver's thoughts. The hum of the engine no longer sounded steady, but seemed to falter, as if burdened by an invisible presence. At the next bend in the road, a shape flickered at the edge of the headlight's reach, a figure, standing still among the trees. The driver's heart raced, hands tightening on the wheel, but when they looked again, there was nothing but branches and fog. The road seemed to narrow, the trees leaning in closer, their limbs skeletal against the starless sky. The world beyond the car felt farther away, as though the vehicle had slipped into some forgotten place, a space between the familiar and the unknown. The air inside thickened, heavy with unspoken dread, as if the car was no longer moving through the world, but through a dream from which it could not wake. The driver dared not look at the rear-view mirror again, afraid of what might meet their gaze. Instead, they focused on the road ahead, though it offered no comfort. The asphalt shimmered in the beam of the headlights, slick with unseen moisture, and the fog grew denser, swallowing the landscape until there was nothing but the narrow path of light cutting through the dark. The sensation of not being alone deepened, settling over the driver like a second skin. They told themselves it was only the night, only their imagination, but in their heart they knew better. Somewhere behind them, in that silent space, the passenger had already taken their place, and they would not leave. The night deepened, swallowing what little light remained beyond the reach of the headlights. The fog thickened as if drawn to the car's slow passage, coiling around it in lazy, drifting tendrils. Each mile seemed longer than the last, the road stretching on without end, the landscape caught in a stasis that felt more like a dream than reality. The driver's grip on the wheel had loosened slightly, but the tension remained, woven into their very bones. The hum of the engine, once steady and familiar, now sounded hollow, as though echoing in some vast, empty space beyond the cabin. The air grew colder, seeping through the vents despite the heater's low, futile whir. With every breath, the driver tasted dampness, the scent of wet earth and moss, as if the world outside was drawing nearer, pressing against the glass. Then, at the edge of vision, something stirred a flicker of movement among the trees lining the roadside. The driver's heart gave a stuttering beat, and their eyes darted toward the shape that materialized briefly in the fog. A figure, tall and thin, draped in shadows, stood motionless beneath the skeletal branches. Its face was hidden, its outline blurred by the shifting mist, and yet there was no mistaking the intent behind its stillness. It was watching. The driver's breath caught, fingers tightening once more around the wheel. For a heartbeat, they considered stopping, rolling down the window, calling out. But the weight of dread held them still, the unspoken certainty that the figure did not belong to this world. Or, perhaps, that the driver no longer did either. The road narrowed further, hemmed in by leaning trees whose limbs clawed at the sky like desperate hands. The fog swirled with greater purpose now, as if it carried secrets, voices, memories forgotten by the waking world. The driver kept their gaze fixed ahead, but the sensation of being followed accompanied grew stronger. The rear-view mirror, once ignored, now seemed to pulse at the edge of vision, drawing the eye like a lodestone. When at last the driver glanced up, the breath they had been holding spilled out in a silent gasp. The back seat, empty just moments before, felt filled with shadow, dense, heavy, undeniable. There was no form, no face, only the unmistakable impression of presence. The passenger had returned, or perhaps they had never left. The road curved gently, revealing a rusted sign half wallowed by ivy and fog. The name of the town, if it had ever existed, was long since lost to time. The driver did not slow. They knew somehow that no refuge waited among those unseen buildings. The car's tires whispered over the damp asphalt, a soft, ceaseless rhythm that marked the passage of time, or perhaps its absence. The world beyond the headlights ceased to matter. Only the road remained, and the silent figure glimpsed at the edge of sight, always just beyond reach. The passenger's weight pressed upon the cabin, unseen but deeply felt, as if the very air had grown too thick to breathe. A signpost loomed ahead, its words obscured, its shape distorted by the fog. But beneath it stood the figure once more, closer now, its outline clearer against the mist. The driver could see the suggestion of arms at its sides, the tilt of a head that seemed to follow the car's progress. The figure did not move, yet its presence filled the world beyond the windshield. The driver's pulse raced, the silence in the cabin deafening. The road ahead stretched into the night, a promise and a threat, and the driver knew with chilling certainty that no matter how far they traveled, the passenger would remain silent, patient, waiting for the moment when the distance between them would finally vanish. The night had become a tapestry of sameness, every mile blending into the next, as if the world had folded in on itself. The driver stared through the windshield, eyes dry and aching, watching as the fog thickened and thinned in endless rhythm. The trees leaned closer with each passing stretch, their branches arched overhead in a kind of natural tunnel that blocked out the stars. The headlights illuminated little beyond the next bend, revealing the same cracked asphalt, the same leaning signposts, the same oppressive mist. And yet, a growing sense of unease whispered at the back of the driver's mind, a suspicion that the road beneath the tires was no longer leading them anywhere at all. The mile markers had long since vanished, or perhaps the driver had stopped noticing them. Time itself felt warped, measured only by the steady thrum of the tires and the slow, creeping dread that filled the cabin. The passenger's presence had deepened, no longer merely a weight, but something that seemed woven into the very air. The driver dared not look into the rear-view mirror now, knowing without seeing that the space behind them was no longer empty. The back seat felt crowded with shadow, the air colder there, as if the night itself had been invited inside. The hum of the engine faltered once, then recovered, the sound distorted by the weight of silence. Outside, the fog pressed closer, wrapping the car in its grasp until the world beyond the windshield disappeared entirely. The driver gripped the wheel tighter, heart hammering, and tried to recall how long they had been driving. But the memory slipped through their grasp, lost in the endless loop of mist and road. Then came the first undeniable sign. A crooked signpost appeared at the roadside, its letters rusted and worn, but familiar. The driver's breath caught as recognition dawned. They had passed this same sign before, hadn't they? The angle of the post, the way the ivy curled around its base, the break in the trees just beyond. It was all the same. The driver slowed, scanning the surroundings for any difference, any sign that this was merely coincidence. But the road ahead curved in precisely the same way. The trees leaned in the same silent arch, and the fog churned in the same sluggish patterns. The car crept forward, tires whispering over the damp asphalt, as the truth settled like a stone in the pit of the driver's stomach. They were no longer traveling forward. The road had betrayed them, folding into itself, trapping them within its endless loop. The passenger seemed to sense the shift. The weight in the back seat grew heavier, oppressive, as if the unseen figure behind the driver now leaned closer, breathing the same stale air. The cabin felt smaller, the shadows thicker, the cold more biting. The driver's hands trembled on the wheel, and for the first time they considered stopping, pulling over, stepping out into the night, facing whatever waited beyond the fog. But fear held them fast, the certainty that once they left the relative safety of the car, there would be no returning. The engine growled beneath them, the only sound in a world swallowed by mist and silence. The road stretched on, curving gently, endlessly, until the same signpost appeared once more, a silent sentinel in the fog. The driver's pulse raced, panic threatening to rise, but they forced themselves to continue, hoping, praying that the loop would break. And yet with each mile the loop tightened, the fog deepened, and the passenger remained silent and unmoving, a presence that could not be escaped. The road was no longer a path to anywhere, but a prison without walls, without end. The driver's thoughts blurred, the line between waking and dreaming thinning with each turn of the wheel. The night offered no answers, only the endless curve of the road, the weight of the unseen passenger, and the chilling certainty that this journey had only just begun. The endless loop of the road had become a kind of waking nightmare, each curve a mirror of the last, each mile a repeat of the mile before. But as the driver pressed on, heart heavy with dread, the fog began to thin, not entirely, but enough to reveal a shape in the distance. A flicker of hope stirred within, fragile and fleeting. The headlights cut through the mist to illuminate the outline of a building, a gas station, old and forgotten, its sign hanging at a crooked angle, swaying gently in the breeze. The structure looked as though it had not seen visitors in years, maybe decades. Weeds pushed up through cracks in the pavement, and the pumps stood silent and rusted, their faces blank where numbers once glowed. The driver slowed instinctively, drawn to the sight like a moth to a dying flame, though the feeling in their chest warned them to keep going. The car rolled to a stop beneath the station's single flickering light, which buzzed weakly against the night. The fog swirled around the vehicle, curling against the tires, creeping up the sides like ghostly fingers. The driver hesitated, hands gripping the wheel, unwilling to shut off the engine. The air inside the car felt thicker now, the cold more biting, the passenger's unseen presence heavier than ever. It was as if the station itself had summoned them, drawing them off the endless loop to this forgotten place. And though the driver longed to step out, to stretch weary legs and feel solid ground beneath their feet, something held them fast. There was a wrongness here, a sense that the station did not truly belong to this world, or perhaps that they no longer did either. The windows had fogged from the inside, thin veils of moisture obscuring the view. The driver raised a trembling hand to wipe the glass, revealing the station more clearly. The building's windows were dark, but behind them, the driver thought they saw a shape move. A flicker of motion, gone as quickly as it appeared. A trick of the light, surely, or of the mind fraying at the edges. But the passenger's presence in the back seat grew sharper, the air colder, the sense of being watched more intense. The driver dared a glance into the rear view mirror, heart-pounding, but saw only shadow, deep and impenetrable. Yet within that shadow, they felt the gaze unblinking, patient, waiting. Outside, the fog coiled tighter, muffling sound, softening the world until only the buzz of the failing light and the hum of the idling engine remained. The driver's thoughts raced, torn between the instinct to flee and the compulsion to stay, to search the station, to find answers that might break the loop. But the station offered no comfort, no sign of life, only decay and silence. The pumps stood like sentinels, the building loomed like a tomb, and the road behind them had vanished into the mist. The driver realized, with a sinking feeling, that turning back was no longer an option. The station was the only break in the endless night, but whether it was a refuge or a trap, they could not yet say. The passenger seemed to shift then, not in movement, but in intent. The weight of their presence pressed harder against the driver's thoughts, as if urging them to step out, to cross the threshold between car and station, between safety and the unknown. But the driver remained still, eyes fixed on the building, heart hammering in the quiet. The night held its breath, the fog thickened once more, and the station stood waiting, a silent promise of answers or oblivion. The journey was no longer about reaching a destination. It had become a question of endurance, how long the driver could resist the pull of the station, the pull of the passenger, the pull of the endless night. For what felt like hours, the driver remained motionless, hands clenched on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the lifeless gas station. The engine's steady hum became a kind of lullaby, a fragile thread holding back the creeping dread. But at last a decision took shape, not born of courage, but of exhaustion. The weight of the endless loop, the thickening fog, the silent passenger in the back. Slowly, as if moving through water, the driver shifted the gear into park, the engine's rumble fading into the night as they turned the key. The sudden silence was deafening, filled only by the faint crackle of the station's dying light and the soft hiss of the fog against the windows. The driver drew a shaky breath and opened the door, the cold night air rushing in, carrying with it the scent of rust and decay. Stepping out, the driver felt the ground beneath their feet, damp and uneven. Weeds brushed against their ankles as they walked cautiously toward the station, each step louder than it should have been in the quiet. The fog parted reluctantly, swirling around their legs, clinging to their skin. The station loomed larger now, its windows dark hollows, its roof sagging with age. The pumps stood in silent rows, their hoses limp and useless. A sign above the office door hung askew, its letters faded to near nothingness. The driver hesitated at the edge of the cracked concrete platform, sensing the invisible line they were about to cross. Behind them, the car sat shrouded in mist, its shape already fading from view. The passenger's presence seemed to stretch between them, tethering the driver to the car even as it urged them onward. The office door creaked open at the slightest touch, revealing a small, cluttered space that smelled of mildew and forgotten things. Papers littered the floor, their edges curled and yellowed. A calendar on the wall displayed a year long past, the dates marked with notes that had bled into illegibility. The driver stepped inside, the floorboards groaning beneath their weight. The cold was deeper here, sharper, as if the station had been holding its breath for years, waiting for this moment. A counter divided the room, behind which shelves sagged under the weight of dust and debris. And there, in the far corner, something glimmered faintly. A key, old and tarnished, resting atop a ledger that seemed untouched by time. The driver approached, drawn to it without knowing why. fingers trembling as they reached for the object. As their hand closed around the key, a sound broke the silence. A soft, rhythmic tapping, as if something, or someone was knocking gently on the car's window. The driver froze, heart pounding, listening as the tapping continued, slow and deliberate, in perfect rhythm with the beating of their pulse. The fog outside the office had thickened once more, swallowing the car entirely. The tapping grew louder, sharper, insistent. The driver gripped the key tightly, feeling the chill of the metal seep into their skin, and backed away from the counter. The station seemed to darken around them, the air growing heavier, as if the building itself disapproved of their presence. And through it all, the tapping continued, echoing through the fog, calling them back. The driver fled the office, boots scraping against the cracked concrete as they stumbled toward where the car had been. But the mist was too thick now. There was no sign of the vehicle, no hint of its shape or the passenger within. Only the tapping remained, disembodied and relentless, guiding the driver deeper into the night. The key felt heavier in their hand, its purpose unknown, its origin forgotten. And as the driver stood alone in the fog, the terrible realization dawned. Whatever waited out there in the mist, whatever had once been the passenger, was no longer content to remain in the car. The fog never lifted, only shifted, as if guiding the driver's every step. The key weighed down their pocket, cold against their leg, a reminder of the station left behind. The road beneath their boots felt unfamiliar now. The painted lines faded, the asphalt cracked like dry skin. Yet the driver pressed forward, drawn toward a distant shape that slowly materialized through the mist. A building low and sprawling, its neon sign flickering weakly above the roofline. Sunset Rest Motel, the letters proclaimed, though most were broken or missing entirely. The light hummed in the silence, the only sound besides the soft scuff of the driver's footsteps on the crumbling pavement. The motel's parking lot was empty, save for a single vehicle, an old sedan, its windows clouded with dust, its tires deflated and cracked. The driver passed it warily, feeling the gaze of unseen eyes from within. The office door stood ajar, swaying slightly in the breeze, and beyond it, the warm glow of a single desk lamp fought against the gloom. The driver hesitated, glancing back at the road swallowed by fog, then stepped inside. The smell of old paper and stale air filled their lungs. A bell above the door jingled softly, the sound strangely comforting in the heavy stillness. The desk was unattended, but on its surface rested a small guest ledger, open to a page that bore no names, only dates, all from decades past. Beyond the desk, a hallway stretched into darkness, lined with closed doors marked by peeling numbers. The key in the driver's pocket seemed to pulse with cold, as if eager to find its lock. The driver withdrew it, holding it up to the dim light, and noticed for the first time the number etched into its surface, 12. The weight of the night pressed closer, urging them forward, toward the door at the end of the hall. Each step echoed hollowly, swallowed by the thick air. As they reached room 12, the driver felt a sudden certainty that this was not the first time they had walked this corridor. That somehow, in some forgotten loop of time, they had been here before. The key turned easily in the lock, the door swinging inward with a groan. The room beyond was small, its furnishings simple. A bed draped in a thin, faded coverlet, a chair by the window, a nightstand, and with a cracked lamp. But it was the mirror above the dresser that drew the driver's gaze. The glass was clouded, streaked with age, yet something within it seemed to move shadows that did not match the room, shapes that did not belong. The driver approached, breath shallow, and peered into the glass. For a moment, they saw only their reflection, pale and hollow-eyed. But then, behind their image, the outline of the passenger appeared, vague, faceless, closer now than ever before. The driver backed away, heart racing, and the room seemed to shrink around them, the walls pressing inward, the air thick with the scent of damp wood and forgotten dreams. Outside the window, the fog clung to the glass, obscuring the world beyond. The driver turned, ready to flee, but the door had closed behind them, the key still in the lock. And as they reached for it, the lamp flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness, leaving only the faint reflection in the mirror. Two figures, one watching, one watched. The door yielded at last beneath the driver's trembling hands, swinging open onto the hallway, which now felt longer, the air colder. The darkness of the room seemed to follow them, leaking into the corridor like ink into water. The driver hurried, boots striking the warped floorboards, the key still clutched tightly, its cold edge biting into their palm. The motel office was no longer visible when they emerged. The corridor had twisted somehow, or perhaps the building itself had changed. Where the front desk should have been, there was only another door, slightly ajar, through which the night's fog spilled as if drawn inside. Stepping out onto the grounds, the driver found the parking lot gone. The motel seemed to float within a vast courtyard of cracked stone and withered grass. The air was heavy with moisture, the fog thicker than before, clinging to the driver's face, filling their nose with the scent of rain on rust. The neon sign still glowed weakly somewhere behind them, casting fractured light across the stone. The driver turned in slow circles, seeking a path, but the shapes of the buildings were unfamiliar now. More structures rose beyond the motel. A diner with broken windows, a gas station that could not be the same as the one from before, and further still, what looked like a church steeple, leaning at, if caught mid-collapse. The driver chose a direction at random, though it felt more as though the night chose for them. The path was uneven, broken by roots that snaked through the stone like veins beneath pale skin. The fog deadened sound, and yet the driver's footfalls echoed as if through an empty cathedral. The key in their hand felt heavier with each step, its metal cold enough now to numb their fingers. A sign appeared ahead, half buried in the earth, its paint long since peeled away. Only a single word remained legible, scrawled in a hand both desperate and certain: stay. They paused, heart racing, the silence pressing in. The fog swirled at their ankles, tugging gently, as if trying to pull them down, to anchor them in place. Somewhere in the distance, a door slammed shut sharp, sudden, final. The driver started forward again, drawn toward the diner's broken windows, hoping for shelter, or perhaps for some trace of the world they had lost. The interior was a ruin of shattered glass and overturned chairs, the booths torn, the counter lined with empty cups that seemed to wait for hands long gone. A jukebox stood silent in the corner, its colorful lights dead, its music forgotten. And as the driver moved deeper into the diner, the fog thickened once more, seeping through every crack, filling the space until the walls themselves seemed to dissolve. The outlines of tables and chairs blurred, lost in the pale haze. The driver turned back toward the door, but the world outside was gone, replaced by endless mist. The diner had become an island adrift in fog, and within its walls the driver felt the presence return. The same silent passenger, closer than ever, unseen but undeniable, watching from just beyond the veil. The fog withdrew just enough for the driver to see that the diner's walls no longer enclosed them. The space where the building had stood now opened onto a street, lined with structures that seemed both familiar and foreign. A town had risen from the mist, its buildings crooked and close, set, their windows dark, their doors shut tight as if in silent defiance of the night. The driver stepped out, boots crunching on gravel that should not have been there, and the sound of their steps echoed strangely, as though the town itself were hollow. Above, a single street lamp flickered, its glow weak against the gloom, casting shadows that stretched and twisted across the ground. The driver followed the main road, their breath visible in the chill air. The town's signs bore names half erased by time, the paint flaked away, the letters warped by rust. Welcoming you to Haven's End, one proclaimed, though the name felt wrong, as if it had been borrowed from another place, another memory. The driver passed a barber shop, its chair overturned and scissors left to rust on the floor, a schoolhouse with a bell that hung silent in its tower, and a general store where empty shelves lined the walls behind shattered glass. Each building seemed a hollow echo of what it should have been, a place abandoned not just by people, but by purpose. A sound broke the stillness, the faint creak of a swing, swaying gently in an unseen breeze. The driver turned, drawn toward a small park that had materialized between the buildings. The swing hung from a frame of splintered wood, its seat worn thin by use or time, and it moved as if pushed by invisible hands. The driver approached cautiously, eyes scanning the shadows, heart quickening with each step. The fog thickened once more, curling around the swing, around the trees that loomed like sentinels at the park's edge. The driver paused, certain they were no longer alone, that the passenger had followed them into this place, waiting just beyond sight. A clock tower rose at the end of the street, its face cracked, its hands frozen at 3 o'clock. The chime that should have sounded at the hour had long since fallen silent, yet the driver thought they heard its echo, a deep, resonant toll that seemed to come from beneath the ground, from some hidden place where time had not yet run out. The air grew colder, the fog denser, and the town seemed to close in, its buildings leaning, its streets narrowing, as if trying to keep the driver from leaving, from escaping whatever story this place wished to tell. And as the driver stood at the center of the crossroads, where all paths met beneath the cracked clock, they felt it again. The weight of that unseen gaze, the certainty that they were being watched. Measured, remembered. The passenger was near, nearer than ever before, and the town itself seemed to pulse with the knowledge of it. The driver's fingers tightened around the key, the metal cold and sharp, and they chose a path at random, knowing the road would choose for them regardless. The driver stepped toward the clock tower, the sound of their boots muffled by the dense fog curling around the street. The tower loomed taller the closer they came, its cracked face glaring down like a blind eye that somehow still saw everything. The wood of the door was warped with age, its surface scarred by time, and perhaps by hands that had once tried to claw their way inside or out. With effort, the driver pushed it open, the hinges groaning loud enough to seem like a cry of warning. The air within was cold, colder than the night outside, and smelled of old stone and rusted metal. Inside, the space was narrow, the walls lined with ancient machinery, cogs and chains and great wheels that no longer turned. The driver ran their fingers over the stone, feeling the chill seep into their skin. A spiral staircase wound upward into darkness, its steps worn thin by footsteps that had faded into memory. With no other choice, they began the climb, the key still clenched in one hand, its weight grounding them in this dreamlike place. Each step echoed, a hollow sound that rose to meet the silence above, as if the tower itself listened. Windows appeared at intervals along the climb, narrow slits that let in little light, but offered glimpses of the town below. The driver paused at one, looking out over the streets that no longer seemed familiar. The fog blanketed everything, so thick now that the outlines of the buildings were lost, the world beyond reduced to shapes that shifted like ghosts. The swing in the park still moved, though no breeze stirred the trees. The driver watched, heart pounding, as a figure emerged at the edge of the square, a shape tall and still, its form blurred by the mist. The passenger, always the passenger, the stairs ended at a wooden door, smaller than expected, set crooked in its frame. The driver hesitated, hand hovering over the latch. A soft ticking filled the space beyond, a sound at once comforting and dreadful, like the heartbeat of the tower itself. Pushing the door open, they entered a chamber lit only by the pale glow of the cracked clock face. The room was filled with gears that no longer turned, with chains that hung slack. In the center stood the clock's great pendulum, unmoving, its brass surface tarnished and cold, and above it, carved into the stone, were words worn by time. It always happens at 3 o'clock. The driver's breath fogged the air as they stood in that hollow space, the ticking louder now, though nothing in the room seemed to move. And then, from within the clock face itself, a faint light pulsed, slow and steady, like the blink of some great eye. The driver stepped closer, drawn to it, and saw at last what the clock watched reflected in the cracked glass was not their own face, but the shadow of the passenger standing at their back. The driver stumbled back from the cracked glass, heart racing, breath shallow. The reflection of the passenger lingered a moment longer than it should have, as if the glass itself held the memory of that shadowed form. A deep cold settled into the room, and the soft ticking that had filled the air grew slower, heavier, as though time itself strained beneath the weight of the tower's gaze. With trembling fingers, the driver gripped the key tighter and turned toward the narrow door, desperate to put distance between themselves and whatever watched from the cracked face of the clock. The spiral staircase seemed longer on the descent, the steps creaking beneath the driver's weight, each one echoing like a warning in the stillness. The air grew colder, the fog seeping inside, coiling around the steps like pale smoke. The town below was invisible now, swallowed by the mist. When at last the driver reached the door at the base of the tower, they hesitated, half expecting the passenger to be waiting just beyond. But when they pushed it open, only silence greeted them, heavy and complete, the kind that pressed against the ears and made the heart beat louder in its absence. The driver made for the car, parked where they had left it, or so they thought. The vehicle stood at the edge of the square, its windows clouded with condensation, the shape of the passenger still visible in the glass if one looked too long. The driver climbed in, the key sliding into the ignition with a familiar click. The engine turned over reluctantly, coughing to life as if protesting the journey. Headlights pierced the fog only a few feet ahead, illuminating a road that seemed unfamiliar despite leading away from the town. The driver pressed the accelerator, eager to leave Haven's End behind, but the road offered no escape. It wound through trees that leaned close, their branches arching overhead like the ribs of some long, dead creature. The fog thickened, thinning only at bends where the driver caught fleeting glimpses of the town again, as if they circled it endlessly. Hours seemed to pass, or perhaps only minutes, for time had become as uncertain as the road itself. The dashboard clock had stopped at 3 o'clock, the same hour marked by the tower, the same hour that echoed through the town's hollow streets. The driver's knuckles whitened on the wheel as the sense of being watched grew stronger. At last the driver recognized the square again, the swing still moving in the park, the clock tower rising above the mist. The town had not let them leave. The road, like the fog, had conspired to keep them here, to loop them back again and again until the story was done. And in the rear-view mirror, the passenger's reflection stared back, closer than before, as silent and still as the grave. The driver sat in the idling car, the hum of the engine a hollow comfort in the thickening fog. The passenger's reflection remained in the rear-view mirror, unmoving, a shape that seemed to merge with the mist outside. The driver's heart pounded, and a cold sweat slicked their palms. With a deep breath, they switched off the engine. Silence rushed in, heavy as a closing door. The air tasted of metal and damp earth. Without looking back, they opened the door and stepped into the night, the gravel crunching beneath their boots like brittle bones. They moved toward the tree line, drawn by the faint suggestion of a path winding into the woods beyond the square. The pines stood like sentinels, their tall forms disappearing into the mist that clung to their branches. The swing in the park creaked once, as if in farewell, before the fog swallowed it whole. The driver hesitated at the edge of the trees, the boundary between town and forest somehow more solid, more final, than it had ever seemed before. But there was no other choice. The car had become a trap, the roads a loop. Only the woods offered the promise, however thin, of escape. The path was narrow, the ground uneven beneath fallen needles and hidden roots. The driver moved carefully, the sounds of their steps muffled by the dense carpet of forest floor. The air grew colder the deeper they went, the fog hanging low between the trunks like a veil. Every so often, the driver paused, certain they heard another set of footsteps, soft and deliberate, keeping pace just beyond sight. But when they turned, there was nothing, only trees and fog, and the distant, hollow sound of the clock tower's bell tolling 3 o'clock, though no time seemed to have passed since they'd left. Car, deeper into the forest, the path split. One way led down toward what sounded like water, the soft rush of a stream or river hidden in the fog. The other climbed gently toward higher ground where the trees thinned, their silhouettes sharp against the pale glow of the clouded moon. The driver chose the higher path, drawn by the promise of a clearer view, of seeing beyond the fog's reach. With each step, their breath frosted the air, the cold biting deeper, as if the forest itself wished to drive them back. Still, they climbed, the sense of being followed growing stronger. The passenger's presence felt in every shadow, in every shiver down their spine. At last, the trees parted, revealing a narrow ledge that overlooked the forest and the town beyond. The driver stood at the edge, heart pounding, eyes searching the endless mist below. There was no sign of the car, of the roads, of the square. The fog had claimed it all. And as they stood there, the wind shifted, parting the mist for the briefest moment, just long enough to reveal the passenger standing at the forest's edge, far below, head tilted upward, watching. The driver lingered at the ledge for only a heartbeat longer, the sight of the passenger below anchoring dread deep within their chest. The cold wind bit at their skin, urging them to move. Without another glance at the figure watching from the shadows of the trees, they turned and made their way down the slope, feet slipping on loose stones, hands grasping at brittle branches. Balance. The forest grew denser again as they descended, the path more treacherous, the fog thickening until the trees appeared like ghosts, fading in and out of existence with each step. The sound of water became clearer, not the steady rush of a stream as the driver had first thought, but the soft, persistent murmur of a marsh. The air turned heavy, damp, and filled with the scent of moss and decay. The ground beneath their feet softened, the earth sucking at their boots with each step, as if trying to pull them down into the unseen depths below. Strange shapes loomed in the mist-fallen trees, broken stumps, the remnants of something long forgotten. The driver's breath came fast and shallow, misting the air before them, as the sense of being watched deepened into certainty. A pale glow broke through the fog, a lantern, perhaps, or the reflection of moonlight on still water. The driver moved toward it, hoping for a clearing, a landmark, anything that might offer direction. But as they drew closer, they saw it for what it was. A pool of water, its surface smooth as glass, reflecting not the moon, but the faint shape of the passenger standing at its edge on the other side. The figure did not move, did not waver, as if it had always been there, waiting. The fog swirled around it, hiding it, revealing it, playing cruel games with the driver's vision. The driver's pulse thundered in their ears. They stepped back, the soft earth giving way beneath their heel, sending them stumbling. The cold seeped deeper, through skin, through bone, chilling thought and reason alike. Around them, the marsh seemed endless, the trees distant, unreachable. The only path forward led closer to the water, closer to the silent passenger whose gaze they could feel, but not meet. The driver clenched their fists, willing themselves to move, to think, to choose any direction but the one that led into those watching eyes. Then, from somewhere deeper in the marsh, came a sound, a low, rhythmic splashing, as if something heavy moved through the water, slow and deliberate. The fog thickened, swallowing the sound, but the driver knew it was still there, whatever it was. And in that moment, the passenger's head tilted, as if listening too, as if it were not the only thing that followed the driver through the night. The sound of that slow, steady splashing became the driver's only guide through the mist-choked marsh. It echoed softly, carrying through the thick air like a heartbeat in the dark. Each step forward sank deeper into the soft earth, water seeping up around their boots, the chill creeping higher. The fog was heavier here, pressing close, as if the marsh itself were trying to smother any trace of movement. The driver's breath was ragged now, every inhalation pulling the cold deeper into their lungs. every exhale clouding the air before their face. Shapes began to emerge from the fog-twisted trees rising from the water, their trunks split and hollowed by time, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. Between them, the splintered remains of an old boardwalk appeared, its wooden planks warped and broken, half sunken into the dark water. The driver stepped onto it, the wood groaning beneath their weight, the sound loud in the oppressive silence. The boardwalk seemed to stretch endlessly into the fog, its destination hidden, its purpose long forgotten. But it was a path, and the driver clung to that small certainty. The splashing sound continued, always just beyond reach, luring them deeper. The water on either side of the boardwalk grew darker, deeper, reflecting nothing but the pale, shifting fog. Now and then, the driver caught glimpses of movement below the surface, ripples that spread without cause, shadows that darted and vanished. And always in the corner of their vision, the passenger lingered, sometimes standing at the edge of the marsh, sometimes visible through a gap in the trees, always watching, always waiting. The driver dared not look too long, fearing that acknowledgement might draw the figure closer. The wind stirred, cold and damp, carrying with it the faint scent of salt and rot. The boardwalk swayed beneath the driver's feet, as if the marsh breathed beneath it. The splashing grew louder now, closer, but when the driver paused to listen, the sound would cease, leaving only the soft lapping of water and the creak of the old wood. It was as if whatever moved through the marsh was aware of their attention, choosing to remain unseen until the moment was right. And with each pause, the driver's dread deepened, the sense of inevitability pressing heavier upon them. At last the boardwalk ended, broken off abruptly where the marsh widened into a still, black pool. The driver stood at the edge, staring into the water, the surface unbroken, the fog swirling above it like a living thing. The passenger stood across the pool, a dark figure barely distinct from the shadows of the trees, its posture unchanged, its gaze unwavering. And beneath that gaze, the driver felt the weight of all that had been forgotten, all that waited in the dark beyond memory. The driver stood frozen at the edge of the broken boardwalk, staring into the still black pool before them. The fog coiled low over the surface, as if guarding whatever secrets lay beneath. Their reflection stared back at them. Yet no, not their reflection. The face in the water was subtly wrong, the eyes too hollow, the mouth set in an expression the driver didn't recognize as their own. The image shimmered, as if the surface were not liquid at all, but some thin veil between worlds. For a moment, the driver couldn't look away, caught in the gaze of this other self that seemed to peer up with knowing sorrow. A soft ripple disturbed the surface, distorting the image. The passenger's form appeared within that ripple, standing behind the reflection as if both existed in the same place, the same moment. The figure's head was tilted slightly, its outline blurred by the fog, but its presence undeniable. The driver took a step back, the wooden board beneath them groaning in protest, but the water's surface did not return to stillness. The ripples widened, spreading out in concentric circles, as though something unseen beneath had begun to stir. Then came a sound, a faint, steady drip, as if water were falling from a great height into the pool. The driver glanced up, but the branches above were bare, the sky hidden beyond the thick mist. The dripping continued, rhythmic, deliberate, as if counting down to something. The fog along the far shore parted slightly, revealing the passenger more clearly than ever. They stood at the edge, feet just above the waterline, their form darker now, more solid. Yet their face remained hidden, lost to shadow. A cold breeze swept across the marsh, sending the fog swirling and carrying with it the faintest whisper. The driver couldn't make out the words, but the voice was familiar, like a memory long buried, surfacing at last. The passenger did not speak, but the presence of that voice seemed tied to them, as if they were its source, or perhaps its echo. The water at the driver's feet lapped softly at the wood, the pool no longer perfectly still. Shapes seemed to move beneath the surface, fleeting and shapeless, there and gone in the blink of an eye. The driver closed their eyes, breathing in the chill air, willing themselves to think. The only path forward lay through the pool, across to where the passenger waited, or perhaps deeper into the marsh's secrets. When they opened their eyes again, the reflection had changed. It no longer mimicked their movements but stared up at them, unmoving, watching. And in that gaze, the driver felt the weight of every forgotten road, every lost mile, and the certainty that the journey was far from over. The driver hesitated at the water's edge, feeling the weight of the reflection's gaze anchoring them in place. But the drip, drip, drip from above, imagined or real, ticked away the moments like a slow and inevitable clock. The board beneath their boots felt fragile now, as if one wrong move might send them tumbling into the cold depths. And so, with a breath that tasted of salt and decay, the driver stepped down into the black pool. The water was icy, rising to their ankles, then calves, sending a sharp chill through every nerve. It felt heavier than water should, as if it clung to them, slowing each movement. With each step deeper, the fog seemed to close in tighter, muffling all sound except the soft ripples that spread outward, and the relentless dripping that now echoed inside the driver's mind. The surface tension of the water broke gently around their legs, yet beneath, the pool felt boundless, as if they might walk forever and never find solid ground again. The passenger waited on the far shore, still as stone, their form blurred by distance but undeniably present. The driver could not see their face, and yet they felt watched, as though unseen eyes studied every hesitant motion. The driver paused when the water reached their waist, cold enough now that their limbs felt slow, heavy, as if the pool itself were trying to claim them. The surface mirrored the skyless fog, broken only by the driver's wake and the occasional ripple from something beneath. Each ripple seemed deliberate, as if some silent watcher beneath the surface shifted position, waiting for the right moment. The reflection of the driver, no longer in sync with their movements, drifted beside them, a hollow-eyed twin, sometimes ahead, sometimes lagging behind. And always, just beneath that image, shadows coiled in the dark water. A sudden softness touched the driver's leg, something smooth, gliding past and gone before they could react. The cold deepened, not just of the water, but within. The kind of cold that seeped into thought, into memory, numbing the edges of reason. The passenger remained still on the far side, but the fog began to shift at their feet, curling upward like smoke, as if the ground itself were dissolving beneath them. And through that thinning fog, the driver thought they saw the faintest outline of an old, forgotten car half-sub, merged in the marsh, its windows dark, its shape familiar and wrong all at once. The dripping sound ceased. The driver stood still, water lapping just beneath their ribs, breath shallow in the heavy air. The pool seemed endless now, its bottom long lost beneath the weight of shadow. The passenger took a single step forward on the shore, and that single step sent out a ripple across both water and mind. And in that ripple, the driver felt it, a connection, fragile but real, between the figure, the pool, and every forgotten mile of road behind them. The driver moved forward, the cold water rising higher with each careful step, until it pressed against their chest, each breath shallow against its crushing chill. The outline of the sunken car grew clearer through the thinning fog, a relic of a time forgotten, its metal frame rusted and broken, halves, wallowed by the black pool. The roof was just visible above the surface, warped and dented, as though something heavy had fallen upon it. The windows, though cracked and clouded with age, seemed to stare back at the driver like hollow eyes. There was a stillness to the scene that felt unnatural, as if time itself had halted here, waiting for the driver's arrival. With slow determination, the driver reached the side of the car, their fingers brushing against the corroded doorframe. The metal felt soft beneath their touch, as if it might crumble away with the slightest pressure. A faint current swirled around their legs, tugging at them gently, as though urging them away. But the driver could not leave, not yet. The passenger's form still waited on the far shore, unmoving, patient. And within the shattered window of the sunken car, something glinted faintly in the dim light. A fragment of a mirror, or perhaps a shard of glass, reflecting not the driver's face, but that of someone else entirely. The driver hesitated, heart pounding in their ears. They peered into the cracked window, the water inside the car as dark as ink. Shapes shifted in the gloom, fleeting impressions of movement, or perhaps the mind's attempt to fill the void. And then, as if drawn by unseen hands, the driver's gaze locked on the rearview mirror, barely clinging to the roof inside. In its fractured surface, they saw not their own face, but the passenger's. The same hollow eyes, the same expressionless features, staring back at them with quiet intensity. The driver recoiled instinctively, their breath catching in their throat. The breeze picked up, stirring the fog into new patterns. The pool seemed to pulse with life, the ripples growing wider, reaching out to the shore and returning again. The car groaned softly beneath the water, the sound muffled and distant, like the echo of a memory too old to recall clearly. The driver placed both hands on the roof, steadying themselves as the current grew stronger. They could feel it now, not just water around them, but a presence beneath, vast and waiting, as if the pool were the mouth of some sleeping thing, and the car its last swallowed secret. The passenger moved at last, taking another step toward the water's edge. The fog thinned further around them, revealing more of the forgotten shore. A crumbling signpost half buried in mud, and a tangle of vines that seemed to form the outline of yet another car, long consumed by the marsh. The driver felt the weight of those hidden wrecks, the burden of journeys ended and never spoken of again. And in that moment, they understood that the car beneath their hands was not the first, and would not be the last. The driver drew a deep breath, though the air was thick with fog and the scent of damp earth, and lowered themselves toward the broken window of the submerged car. The cold was numbing now, but the water seemed to part for them, as if the pool itself wanted them inside. Fingers found the jagged edge of the window, and slowly the driver slipped through, the world above fading into muffled silence. Inside, the car felt impossibly vast, as if the small cabin had been stretched into a cavern beneath the water. The seats were barely visible beneath layers of silt and shadow, and the air that remained trapped inside tasted stale and metallic. In the dim light, the driver's eyes adjusted to the gloom, and they saw that the car's interior was not empty. Objects drifted slowly in the stillness, scraps of paper, the remains of a torn map, a glove, its leather cracked and brittle with age. The rearview mirror hung at an odd angle, and in its fractured reflection, the driver saw the passenger once more, though the figure did not appear outside now, but within, seated quietly in back seat. The hollow eyes stared forward, unblinking, as if waiting for the driver to notice them. The cabin's silence felt absolute, broken only by the soft creak of shifting metal. The driver's breath fogged the glass, though they no longer knew whether they breathed air or water. A memory surfaced of long drives through empty landscapes, of headlights cutting through the night, and always the passenger beside them, silent, watching. But no, that could not be, and yet the memory felt true, as real as the cold pressing in from all sides. The driver reached for the glove compartment, fingers trembling, and found it unlocked. Inside, waterlogged pages clung together, receipts, handwritten notes, and a photograph that slipped free, drifting down like a falling leaf. The driver caught it before it touched the floor. The photograph was faded, its edges curled, but the image was clear enough. The driver, younger, standing beside the very car that now cradled them. And in the background, barely visible, the same passenger, half hidden in shadow, their face indistinct but familiar. The sight of it sent a chill deeper than the water's cold. The driver tried to speak, but the words dissolved into silence, as if the cabin itself swallowed sound. Outside, the fog swirled against the cracked windows, and something pressed close, as if listening, waiting for the driver's next move. The current shifted, gentle at first, then stronger, as though the pool sought to reclaim what had been disturbed. The car groaned again, a hollow, aching sound, and the passenger in the mirror leaned forward, their hollow eyes fixed on the driver's. The driver felt the weight of the gaze, the inevitability of this moment, as if it had played out countless times before. And as the pool began to rise inside the cabin, the driver understood. There was no escaping the passenger, for they had always been there, waiting beneath the surface of memory. The cabin filled with water slowly. The cold seeped through the driver's clothes, through skin, through bone, until even thought felt heavy beneath its weight. The car shuddered as the muddy bottom of the pool released its grip, and the vehicle began to drift downward, pulled toward unseen depths. Above, the last glimmer of the surface faded beneath layers of swirling silt and fog. The world became a muted twilight, where shapes distorted and the boundary between memory and reality dissolved. The driver could no longer tell if their heart beat faster from fear or from some deeper recognition that this place, this moment, was one they had always been destined to reach. The passenger's reflection in the shattered rearview mirror did not move, but the sense of their presence grew stronger, more insistent. It was as if the figure no longer needed form to exist. Its being wrapped around the driver's thoughts, filling the small space of the cabin with silent expectation. The photograph drifted past the driver's face, its edges dissolving into the dark water, until only the ghost of the image remained in their mind. Outside the cracked windows, the landscape of the pool shifted strangely, revealing fragments of road signs, twisted guardrails, and headlights that flickered faintly before vanishing into blackness. The deeper the car sank, the more the driver felt the weight of unseen eyes. They weren't alone in this descent. Shapes moved beyond the glass form's half-seen, faces pressed close for the briefest moment, only to fade into the gloom. Were these the remnants of other travelers, other drivers who had strayed from the road and found themselves beneath the surface? Or were they memories given shape by the water, by the fog, by the endless pull of the passenger's gaze? The driver's mind blurred the line between the living and the lost, between the present and the past. At last, the car settled on the bottom of the pool with a soft, final sigh, the silt rising in lazy spirals around it. The driver stared through the windshield at the dark expanse beyond, the headlights casting long, broken beams that touched nothing but endless water. The cabin was filled now, and yet the driver did not struggle, did not flee. Instead, they listened, to the creak of metal, to the faint whisper of currents, to the silent promise of the passenger's presence. There was no panic, only a profound stillness, as though they had crossed into a place where time no longer held meaning. And in that stillness, a single sound broke through, a low hum, like the distant echo of tires on asphalt, or the memory of an engine idling on some forgotten roadside. The driver felt the pull of it, the call to continue the journey, even here, even now. The passenger's reflection in the mirror tilted its head ever so slightly, as if acknowledging the path ahead. And the driver understood. The road had not ended. It had only changed, hidden now beneath layers of water, of time, of forgotten dreams. The silence of the submerged car became a canvas upon which memories began to paint themselves. The driver, suspended between the weight of water and the gravity of thought, saw scenes unfold in the darkness beyond the windshield. Roads stretched endlessly beneath a blood-red sky. Towns without names flickered like mirages, their windows hollow and dark. A gas station stood beneath a sagging canopy, where the passenger had first appeared not in the flesh, but as a shadow leaning against the pump, waiting. The driver realized that every stop along the journey, every strange encounter, had been marked by the passenger's silent presence. A pattern, subtle and patient, had always been there. The water outside shifted, revealing fleeting images that felt like fragmented memories. The motel with the flickering vacancy sign, the diner where the radio had hissed with static just before a storm, the highway exit that led to nowhere. In each place, the driver recalled moments when time seemed to bend, when the fog thickened, when a sense of being watched became undeniable. The passenger had been close, always close, whether as a figure glimpsed in a reflection, a shadow at the edge of headlights, or a presence in the back seat that vanished the moment the driver turned around. These were not random encounters. They were markers on a map the driver had been following without knowing. Inside the car, the pressure of the water felt less suffocating now, as if the driver had adapted to this submerged world. The hum of the unseen engine grew louder, and with it, a rhythm emerged, like the steady pulse of tires on asphalt, a heartbeat beneath the waves. The driver understood then that the journey was not bound by the surface world. The road continued here, beneath the water, beneath memory itself, winding through forgotten places where the passenger waited at every turn. The terror of the unknown began to shift into a strange familiarity, as though the driver had always known this road existed, buried deep beneath layers of denial. The rearview mirror, cracked and clouded, reflected not just the passenger's hollow eyes, but the driver's own face, pale, tired, marked by the weight of endless miles. And behind them, stretching into the dark, were other cars, other drivers, all caught in the same descent, all haunted by passengers they could neither see fully nor leave behind. The driver felt a connection, a thread that wove through every lost traveler, binding them together on this hidden path. The passenger was not a single entity, but many a reflection of every fear, every regret, every road not taken. As the car rested on the bed of the pool, the driver felt the subtle shift of the current, as if inviting them forward. The pattern was clear now. The passenger would always appear when the driver strayed from the path meant for them. The silent figure was both warning and guide, a reminder that the road chosen was one that could not be undone. The headlights flickered, casting ghostly beams into the dark water, and the driver placed their hands on the wheel, ready to continue. Somewhere beyond this place, the true destination waited hidden beneath the surface of every forgotten dream. The driver gripped the steering wheel, its leather slick beneath trembling fingers. Outside the cracked windshield, the underwater world shifted and shimmered, as if the water carried not only silt and shadow, but the memories of all who had passed this way. The headlights flickered again, and in their glow, the driver saw what could only be described as a road, a pale, wavering ribbon of broken asphalt stretching through the gloom. The familiar painted lines, though blurred by the current, beckoned forward, promising some destination deeper in the dark. Without thought, without question, the driver's foot pressed gently down where the gas pedal had been, and the car began to move as if by its own will. The submerged road led between towering shapes that might have been buildings once, or perhaps the hollow remnants of long, forgotten dreams. Their outlines loomed like ruins swallowed by the deep, their windows empty, their doors forever closed. The water hummed with the vibration of the car's passage, a low, ceaseless thrum that echoed the driver's heartbeat. At times, faces seemed to appear in the dark windows, faces that watched but did not speak, their eyes wide with recognition, or perhaps with warning. The passenger's presence remained steady, a constant pressure at the edge of awareness, as if their gaze steered the car more surely than the driver's hands. As the miles, or what felt like miles, passed beneath the tires, the driver noticed the signs. They rose from the silt like gravestones, their words faded, their shapes distorted by rust and time. Stay on the road, do not stop, do not turn back. Each sign bore the same message, repeated endlessly, as if meant for all who dared this hidden highway. The driver's breath came slow and steady, fogging the inside of the windshield. The urge to look back was powerful, almost irresistible, but they fought it, knowing somehow that to glance at the passenger now would be to surrender to the depths entirely. The fog beyond the water grew thicker, denser, until the world beyond the beams of the headlights disappeared altogether. The driver's world became the car, the road, and the hum that guided them forward. Time lost meaning. Whether minutes or hours had passed, the driver could not tell. Only the signs remained constant, each one rising out of the dark with its silent command. The submerged world pressed in from all sides, but the path ahead remained clear, as if the road itself protected those who dared to follow it. And then, in the distance, a glow emerged, soft at first, like moonlight filtered through storm clouds. It grew steadily brighter, revealing the outline of an archway formed of twisted metal and stone, half collapsed, yet still standing as a gate to something beyond. The driver felt the passenger lean closer, though they did not move. The air in the cabin thickened, heavy with the weight of expectation. The destination drew near. The submerged road was not endless after all, and what lay beyond that broken gate would change everything. The glow beyond the archway bathed the submerged world in pale silver, and as the driver approached, the weight of the water seemed to lessen. The car glided forward, drawn by a force older than memory, older than the road itself. The arch, though cracked and leaning, radiated an energy that felt both sacred and ominous. Twisted metal vines wrapped around stone pillars, their surfaces etched with symbols the driver did not recognize but somehow understood. They spoke of journeys, of promises, of debts long unpaid. The passenger's presence became heavier, more defined, as though their time hidden in the shadows was at an end. Crossing beneath the arch was like passing into another realm. The fog thinned, revealing a vast underwater plain where the road split into countless paths. Each trail glowed faintly, forming a web of choices stretching beyond sight. The driver felt a pull in every direction, as if each path led to a different truth, a different end. But only one glimmered with a steady light, the original road, the one they had followed for what felt like lifetimes. The passenger's reflection in the windshield seemed to nod, or perhaps it was only the shifting current that gave that illusion. The choice had already been made long ago. The plane was not empty. Shapes moved at the edges of vision, forms that might have been other cars, other lost souls wandering these drowned crossroads. Lights flickered in the distance, sometimes stationary, sometimes moving, like the eyes of creatures that lived in this silent deep. The hum of the car grew louder, resonating with the rhythm of the submerged world. The driver realized they were not alone, had never been alone, not on the surface, not beneath it. All who strayed from the known path eventually found their way here, to this place of choices and endings. A sign stood at the heart of the plane, larger than the others, its message stark and final. You are almost home. Do not stop, do not turn. The words glowed faintly, as if lit from within by memories. The driver's hands tightened on the wheel. The passenger's form was clearer now, a figure cloaked in shadow, featureless yet familiar, as if carved from the driver's own fears. They were a reflection of the journey, a silent witness to every wrong turn, every regret that had led to this moment. And still they waited, patient as the road itself. As the car passed the sign, the paths behind them began to collapse, swallowed by the shifting silt and the endless dark. There was no turning back. The road ahead narrowed, the glow at its end brightening with each passing moment. The driver felt a strange peace settle over them, a calm born of inevitability. The passenger's hand, unseen but felt, rested on the driver's shoulder, guiding, steadying. Together, they moved toward the light, toward whatever lay at the end of the submerged road. The road narrowed as the car glided onward, the pale glow at its end no longer distant, but near enough to cast long, shifting shadows across the dashboard. The driver felt the weight of the passenger's silent presence grow heavier still, as if with every mile they drew closer not just to a place, but to a reckoning. The submerged plain around them seemed to dissolve into endless dark, leaving only the narrow strip of road suspended in the deep. The hum of the car had changed. It now pulsed in time with the driver's heartbeat, as if the vehicle itself lived and waited for the moment to arrive. The glow ahead resolved into the outline of a structure, something that might once have been a house or a station, though it bore no features familiar to the driver. Its walls were cracked, its windows hollow, yet it radiated a warmth that contrasted the cold grip of the deep water. The road curved gently toward it, as though funneling the car into its embrace. For the first time in what felt like lifetimes, the driver eased their foot from the pedal and let the car coast, feeling the strange gravity of the place pull them closer. The passenger shifted in their seat, a movement so subtle it could have been imagined, but it filled the cabin with the weight of expectation. Outside, shapes began to gather at the edges of vision, figures like shadows, like echoes of travelers who had come this way before. They lined the invisible boundaries of the road, standing silent and still, their faces hidden in the gloom. The driver felt no fear, only the sense of being watched, of being measured. The passenger's reflection in the rear view mirror seemed to merge with these watchers, as if they were one and the same. The hum of the car became a low chant, a sound that spoke not in words, but in truths the driver had long tried to forget. The vehicle slowed as it reached the structure, the glow from within spilling onto the broken road like dawn light on forgotten ruins. The driver's hands trembled on the wheel, not from cold, but from the certainty that this was the end of the journey, or at least the end of this part of it. The passenger leaned forward, unseen but undeniable, and the driver understood without hearing words. It was time to stop. Time to face whatever waited beyond the threshold. The road had brought them here, as it had always meant to. For a moment everything was still. The watchers remained at the edge of sight. The glow from the structure pulsed softly, like the beating of a heart. The driver took one final breath, the water beyond the windows pressing close, the passenger's unseen hand resting lightly on their shoulder. The car came to a stop, and silence reigned deep and absolute. The road that waited had given them its answer. All that remained was to step through the door and accept what was owed. The driver stepped out of the car, and the world outside felt heavier than before, as if the air itself had thickened, or perhaps it was the water pressing in so closely now that it blurred the lines between air and sea. The structure ahead loomed, not grand or vast, but inevitable, as though it had always been waiting for this moment. The glow from within pulsed faintly, casting long, trembling shadows that shifted with the unseen currents. The passenger did not follow, but their presence remained, filling the space behind the driver like a tether, as if they could not leave the car, or would not, until the final truth had been claimed. Each step toward the doorway felt both familiar and foreign, as if the driver had walked this path 1,000 times in dreams they could not remember. The watchers at the edge of sight did not move, yet their silent attention pressed on the driver's back, urging them onward. The structure's walls were slick with moisture, the scent of salt and rust hanging in the air. The door itself was not a door at all, but a jagged gap in the wall, as though something had burst through long ago and left the wound unhealed. The light within spilled out in waves, warm and cold in turn, and with it came a sound, a low, ceaseless murmur, like the whisper of a tide against forgotten stones. The driver crossed the threshold, and the world changed. Inside, the space was vast, far larger than it should have been, with walls that seemed to recede into endless gloom. Pools of water gathered in the corners, reflecting the glow-like fragments of broken mirrors. The floor beneath the driver's feet was uneven, worn smooth by time or by the passage of countless others who had come before. And there, at the center of the room, stood a chair, simple, wooden, but impossibly old. The driver knew, without knowing how, that the passenger's seat in the car had always been a reflection of this chair, and that the one who had ridden with them so long had once sat here, waiting. A voice rose from the shadows, not loud, not demanding, but soft, patient, and sad. It spoke no words the driver could understand, but its meaning was clear. The journey had never been about escape or destination, but about return. The passenger had been leading them back, guiding them to the place where the circle would close. And now the driver was to take the seat, to become what the passenger had been, so the next traveler could find their way. The watchers beyond the walls shifted, their faces still hidden, their forms still as mist, but their silent witness spoke of acceptance, of inevitability. The driver stood before the chair, the weight of the journey settling upon their shoulders like the deep itself. The glow faded, leaving only the soft shimmer of the water at their feet, and the hush of the watcher's breath. The passenger remained outside, seated still in the car, unseen but present, waiting for the driver to choose. And in that moment, the driver understood. The road had no end, only waypoints, and the passenger would never leave. Not truly. Because the passenger was the journey, and the car, and the chair, and the road itself. The driver stepped out of the car, and the world outside felt heavier than before, as if the air itself had thickened, or perhaps it was the water pressing in so closely now that it blurred the line between air and sea. The structure ahead loomed, not grand or vast, but inevitable, as though it had always been waiting for this moment. The glow from within pulsed faintly, casting long, trembling shadows that shifted with the unseen currents. The passenger did not follow, but their presence remained, filling the space behind the driver like a tether, as if they could not leave the car, or would not, until the final truth had been claimed. Each step toward the doorway felt both familiar and foreign, as if the driver had walked this path 1,000 times in dreams they could not remember. The watchers at the edge of sight did not move, yet their silent attention pressed on the driver's back, urging them onward. The structure's walls were slick with moisture, the scent of salt and rust hanging in the air. The door itself was not a door at all, but a jagged gap in the wall, as though something had burst through long ago and left the wound unhealed. The light within spilled out in waves, warm and cold in turn, and with it came a sound, a low, ceaseless murmur, like the whisper of a tide against forgotten stones. The driver crossed the threshold, and the world changed. Inside, the space was vast, far larger than it should have been, with walls that seemed to recede into endless gloom. Pools of water gathered in the corners, reflecting the glow-like fragments of broken mirrors. The floor beneath the driver's feet was uneven, worn smooth by time, or by the passage of countless others who had come before. And there, at the center of the room, stood a chair, simple, wooden, but impossibly old. The driver knew, without knowing how, that the passenger's seat in the car had always been a reflection of this chair, and that the one who had ridden with them so long had once sat here, waiting. A voice rose from the shadows, not loud, not demanding, but soft, patient, and sad. It spoke no words the driver could understand, but its meaning was clear. The journey had never been about escape or destination, but about return. The passenger had been leading them back, guiding them to the place where the circle would close. And now the driver was to take the seat, to become what the passenger had been, so the next traveler could find their way. The watchers beyond the walls shifted, their faces still hidden, their forms still as mist, but their silent witness spoke of acceptance, of inevitability. The driver stood before the chair, the weight of the journey settling upon their shoulders like the deep itself. The glow faded, leaving only the soft shimmer of the water at their feet, and the hush of the watcher's breath. The passenger remained outside, seated still in the car, unseen but present, waiting for the driver to choose. And in that moment, the driver understood. The road had no end, only waypoints, and the passenger would never leave. Not truly. Because the passenger was the journey, and the car, and the chair, and the road itself. The car waited, engine silent, beneath a sky that no longer seemed to belong to any place or time. The clouds hung low, heavy with promise, and the road stretched ahead, vanishing into a horizon that could never quite be reached. The air hummed softly, filled with the quiet breath of the world between worlds. The driver was gone now, or rather, they had become part of the path, part of the story that would be told again and again in whispers of wheels on empty roads and headlights cutting through endless night. The chair at the heart of the structure lay empty once more, waiting for the next soul to return, as it always did. Inside the car, the new passenger sat, hands resting quietly on their lap, eyes fixed on the horizon that called them forward. They did not remember how they had come to be here, not truly, but they felt no fear, only the soft pull of the journey, the promise of the road, the hush of the engine beneath them. The seat embraced them like a memory, familiar and strange all at once, as if they had ridden this way before in dreams long forgotten. The road outside shimmered with heat, or perhaps with the breath of the watchers who stood unseen along its edge, their silent attention marking the beginning of another story. The car began to move, slowly at first, the tires rolling over cracked pavement that seemed to remember every traveler who had passed this way. The sky above remained unchanged, the light neither rising nor falling, caught in an eternal dusk that softened the edges of the world. The passenger did not look back. There was nothing behind them now, only the faint echo of a choice made, a chair left behind, a guide who had once shared the quiet of this ride. Ahead, the road curved gently, disappearing into a mist that rose from the ground like the breath of the earth itself. As the car moved onward, the passenger began to notice the shapes along the roadside, the remnants of forgotten towns, the outlines of doorways that led nowhere, the faint glow of lights that had no source. The watchers were there, as they always were, their forms half hidden in shadow and haze, their faces turned toward the car, bearing witness to another soul lost to the endless journey. And yet there was no malice in their gaze, no threat in their stillness. They were the memory of the road itself, the silent guardians of the space between leaving and arriving. The journey would continue, it always did. The passenger would ride, and the road would stretch on, and one day, when the time was right, the car would stop once more. The passenger would step out, and the chair would be waiting, and the cycle would begin again. But for now, there was only the hum of the engine, the soft whisper of tires on asphalt, and the road without end beneath a sky that never changed. And in that quiet, timeless space, the passenger who never leaves the car settled deeper into their seat, eyes on the horizon, as the world slipped by in a dream without waking.